Hi, my name is Sierra Bradshaw.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Monique.
Hi, my name is Jordan Grant.
My name is Jafad, aka Mr. Socialite, and this is my lovely fiance Renee, aka Mrs. Socialite.
Hi, my name is Imani Spencer.
Welcome and thank you for attending the Healing for the Disenfranchised 2020 Virtual Summit. Enjoy.
Our speaker for this segment is Teresa McCormick Dunlap of the Wilhelmina Consulting Research Agency.
Hi, my name is Teresa McCormick Dunlap. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am also the sole proprietor of the Wilhelmina Consulting and Research Agency, which I started 3 years ago to kind of house the type of research that I wanted to do to aid our community in healing itself and in kind of tabulating and telling our stories. So I'm here today to share with you a little bit of information about generational curses and how we can address them in our community. So let's dive in. I am going to be sharing with you briefly some statistics from the website AmericanAddictionCenters.org. I definitely encourage you to go in there and look at some things yourself. I think you might be surprised at some of the research that I uncovered there, and definitely is worth it to cross-reference. But I really want to dive deeper into how we address what the actual generational curses look like in our community and how we address them. But first, this is statistics. So these are the findings from the 2018 National Survey on Drug Use and Health. Now, of course, I'm going to go ahead and read it off of here because there's no way that I can contain all these numbers at once. So just bear with me as I share some of this information with you. Again, I found these numbers to be actually a bit encouraging because I expected them to be much more dismal than they appear to be. 6.9% of African Americans have substance use abuse disorder compared to the rate of 7.4 among the total population. So we're low on that. 3.4% of African Americans have an illicit drug use disorder compared to a rate of 3% among the total population. Now, mind you, when we're talking about illicit drug use, we have to also talk about the disparities in how the disparities in how our neighborhoods are policed, and also in recording and reporting, right? So it may look like we're higher because perhaps our neighborhoods are policed more stringently than others, and maybe the illicit drug use is going undetected or unrecorded in other populations or in the mass total population. Past month of illicit drug use among African Americans is 13.7% and is more than Caucasians at 12% and Hispanics at 9.7%. Past month marijuana use among African Americans is 12.2% and it's higher than the general population of 10.1%. And African Americans report a lower lifetime use of cocaine, 8.5%, compared to Caucasians at 17.6% and Hispanics at 11.1%. So it appears that we prefer more to drink, and the information, rather, the studies appear to bear witness to the fact that maybe in our culture we are more prone to drinking and perhaps marijuana use than actual cocaine and crack use. Alcohol use disorders are less common among African Americans, which is at 4.5%, than the total population, which is at 5.4%. Again, this here speaks to the fact that the alcohol substance is actually legal, so the reporting might be a bit more effective and a bit more accurate than maybe the illicit drug use is. And it doesn't lend itself so much to policing, so therefore maybe we'll get more information about the general population than we normally might. Binge drinking among African Americans is 23% and is slightly less common than in Hispanics at 24% and Caucasians at 25.7%. And the rate of heavy drinking among African Americans is 4.3% and is much less than the general population of 6.1% and the Caucasian population of 7.2%. So it goes on to talk a little bit about illicit drug use and how that's reported, and that it appears that even though we are smaller in numbers with the population, the use is higher. While again, I think this lends itself more to the fact that our neighborhoods are more stringently policed, and those disparities will show up. The other thing I'd like to talk about is that receiving treatment. Among those Americans who needed treatment for illicit drug use, 21.3% of blacks received treatment at a specialty facility compared to 17.3% of the rest of the population. 9.1% of African Americans who need specialty treatment for substance abuse compared to 9.3% of the rest of the population, and 15.2% of those that need treatment go on to receive treatment compared to 9.6% of the rest of the population. So although the treatment options and outcomes among African Americans, the options may not be as high, we're actually more prone to seeking help than other populations, and this is again from 2018 numbers. So I think that some of the things that we see are actually quite encouraging. 17 million whites reported having used an illicit drug within the last month, compared to 4 million blacks who reported having used an illicit drug within the last month. Now, of course, those numbers will probably drop even more significantly if marijuana is ever, considered legal across the states, considering that that appears to be our drug of choice. So I want to talk a little bit about generational curses and about substance abuse addictions and untreated mental illness and how it looks in our families. So let's first identify what a generation is. A generation is all of the people born and living at about the same time regarded collectively. It can also be described as an average period, and that is generally considered to be about 20 to 30 years, during which children are born and grow up and become adults and begin to have children. So even beyond the ages, it's actually who is born and given birth. So I have aunts and uncles who are actually aged along with me, but generationally we don't share the same generation, right? Because there might have been some crossover with my grandparents having children, with my parents having children. So now what a generational curse involves is negative patterns from your family history that are repeated in your own lifetime. Generational curses. Now we hear a lot about that in the Bible. We heard a lot about people talking about that in church, generational curses and what they look like. And we've made it so spiritual that perhaps we've missed the very real effects that it has on the family, right? That is not just something that's considered to be a spiritual thing and some type of pall or darkness or cloud or curse over our family, but rather habits that have been perpetuated throughout generations and keep showing themselves up. So here's examples of generational curses. Generational curses can show themselves in substance abuse, verbal abuse and or neglect, in incest, and incarceration, and early or unwanted or unwed pregnancies. These are things that we'll just see happening over and over again. So a generational curse can actually be something like a family habit, if we want to just normalize the term, family habit. So the thing about generational curses is, or what we consider to be generational curses, is that these things travel so long in the families until people identify them as family traits, when in actuality sometimes it can actually be trauma. So I was born and bred in the Bronx, and I came to Wadesville, North Carolina in my early 20s. And what I noticed about coming to a small town was that once I got here in North Carolina, and my family was, helping me transition from big city living to, small town living, and kind of showing me the ropes and sharing information with me about families and our neighbors and so forth. I noticed that there were whole families that were given these attributes, right? That, normally in a big city, you would just been considered to be an individual personality trait. But they were given whole families. Such things like the Henry Halls and the Smiths, they behave like this. The McCormicks, they have terrible tempers. That was my family, so I'll go ahead and share that. Different, they never take care of their children. They're always good mothers. It wasn't just negative things, it was positive things as well. So I will tell you that those family traits that they were sharing with me were merely habits that had been perpetuated from generation to generation to generation, and the stories had been passed down, and so they had now been considered to be part of or intrinsic in their family culture. However, a lot of times, even though, like I said, there could be positive things, like all of those McFadden women know how to cook, or all of those Montgomerys are churchgoers. It could also be very negative things, like all the McCormick men beat their wives, all of the McCormick women are violent, that sort of thing. So why is it important to address our wounds? Because although we have been hearing about this as being generational traits and curses, when we start to look at it in the light of it actually being maybe traumas and habits that need to be eradicated from the family, then we are faced with the question of how do we address it and why it's important to address it. Now, I think it should be easy to know why it's important to address it. If it's some negativity in the family lines, you definitely want to eradicate it, right? If you have generation upon generation of mothers who never take care of their children, or fathers who never stay, or, marriages that never last, then you definitely want to stabilize the family. So there is a book that I like to read over and over again because it's a lot to digest, and it's by Dr. Joy DeGroy, and it's called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And an interesting passage in the book talks about a tribe. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the tribe, but a tribe that is a warrior tribe, very fierce and a very established and proud tribe. And what she talks about in the book is the way that they actually greet each other. So now what I noticed when I was over in the nation, in the continent of Africa, and visiting countries there, is that the way that you greet your neighbor or your family or your friends kind of is indicative of what your culture is like. So in the same manner that we say, what's up, how you doing? Down here it might be, how are you feeling, or how are you doing? How are you feeling today? That's a culture, it's a Southern culture of wanting to know how you're doing, if everything's okay with it. You in New York, in North Carolina. In New York, it might be, what's good, what's up with you? A popular phrase when I was growing up was, how you living, right? They wanted to know how you were living. You living foul? You living great? How you living, right? So it was indicative of the culture of wanting to get to the crux of the matter before I get in too deep. How you living, right? So when I went to Ghana, one of the things that I noticed that they kept saying, it was a word Imanye. And Imanye was a word that I kept asking everyone, what does it mean? Because understanding that language is so important, and that when you have a language, its nuances are really, really revealing, right? It reveals a lot about the culture. And I was like, what is that you guys are saying in Manye? I hear it every time. And so I asked everyone that I came into contact with what it was. And I got a couple of different meanings, all of them similar, but adding more layers to the question. So Manye meant simply, what brings you here, right? What brought you was another one. I liked my one of my servers at a restaurant that was asked the question, responded by saying, what is your mission? Right? So let me know that in Ghana, people were interested in in what it was that was driving you. What was your motivation? What was happening with you? What was what was it that was driving your trajectory in your life? Really, just that simple, just by hearing that greeting. And so the greeting that was discussed in post-traumatic slave syndrome was, how are the children doing? It was loosely translated. How are the children? How are the children doing? And no matter how fierce that tribe was, it was very clear from their greeting that they understood that no matter how well they had done in the past, no matter how fierce their history, if the children weren't doing well, then they weren't doing well. So the most important part of them was their youth. How are the children, right? And so that question drove them. Regardless of what they were doing, that was the important thing. And so when you think about why it's important to address our wounds, we have to think about the next generations, the generations that are coming forth. Not just us who are here. Some of us are on our way out, honey. So we don't have to worry so much about, what may have happened in the past. But for those who are coming behind us, those of us who are coming, next, they're the ones that we want to prepare a better place for. And so it's important to address our wounds so that we create a better future for our children. If we don't address them, we'll continue to perpetuate them throughout our family lines. So it's just like a sore that's left to fester. A simple sore, if it becomes infected on a finger or hand, can cause the entire appendage to be removed if gangrene sets in. And it's similar likewise in a family. If there's something simple that is causing pain and discomfort and becomes infected and is allowed to fester, it can kill off the rest of the generations or kill off the good in them. We may still survive, but barely. Examples of wounds that have never been addressed are those with family habits such as the grandmother or great-grandmother always raises the child. The child is never raised by its birth mother. The father always leaves or has several children by several women, none of whom he's committed to, right? Or unwed or early parentage, where whole families have children before reaching adulthood. Drinking and drinking around the children, and drug abuse and drug use around the children. People never learning to nurture their children or consider them first. Those are some of the ways in which generational habits and family habits can become part of the family culture, and which then become generational curses. So how do we address them? How do we break those chains? The way that we address any kind of wounds in our psyche, emotional or familial, is through reflection. I am a therapist, so of course I'm going to tout that as the end all and cure all for it, because I do know that in our culture, therapy has been stigmatized so much that it has kind of been a thing that our community, African American community, is afraid of or ashamed of, right? So even when we go and search out help, some of us do it shamefacedly. You might hear people saying things, at least in my generation, girl, I had to go see somebody, I had to talk to somebody about and just kind of muted tones talk about it, girl, I went to see somebody, because I was tripping, and so we have all of this stigma attached to the idea of getting help, and so it becomes kind of like a dirty secret when we don't, right? It becomes very cyclical. So there is definitely, what I like about this new generation, the generation where my children are, the millennials, and generation I think is Z and Y. That generation, they talk about their therapist, they're just wide open with it. Girl, I was talking to my therapist the other day. They just out there with it, and I love it because they're addressing issues that have been probably very long standing in their family, and it's going to take their family to the next level. So what happens in individual therapy, and so in order for us to heal, we need individual and we need collective healing. We need individual therapy, and sometimes we need family therapy, right, in order for us to heal. So individual healing allows you to explore what the actions that your family, that happened in your family has done to you personally. Because it's every one of us, it's our responsibility to create peace in our own lives, in our own hearts, in our own minds, and to heal to heal and to create our own happiness. So often I hear people saying, well, this didn't make me happy, and they didn't make me happy, and he didn't make me happy, and she didn't make me happy. In actuality, it is only we're the only ones who can actually make ourselves happy, and it's our responsibility to do so. And when we do so, then collectively we all prosper, right? But what individual healing looks like, particularly in therapy, is things like addressing stigmas, addressing how family actions and family curses have affected you personally, right? And affecting change and identifying triggers. Why do I get so upset when someone says this to me? Why do I go off when this happens? You know, why do I stay in my room some days and don't want to talk to anybody? Like, what is happening? So of course we definitely want to identify triggers. We also want to address any type of medical issues, because sometimes it's more than you just thinking about what is wrong and changing and retraining your thoughts. Sometimes it's actually medical. Now, I am a firm believer in holistic healing. I do believe that there are a lot of herbs and a lot of foods and a lot of things that we can do with what we put in our body to help us to regulate our emotions and to regulate the spikes in our energy levels and kind of even us out. However, there are times when we actually need the actual medicine, and so that has also been stigmatized in our culture, that we shouldn't need medicine, particularly in the church. The church talks about, all you need is God and all you need is, Jesus. And I mean, you could look in the Bible and see that there were some people that was actually tripping. Saul, what was he seeing? Why was it that he had a spirit that became troubled and needed music to calm him down? Like, what was going on with Saul? Saul needed some meds, okay? He was murderous when he didn't have them, right? He wanted to kill. He was paranoid, thought everybody was after him, right? Didn't recognize a friend from foe. So even in the Bible, we hear stories about people that were mentally ill that probably would have really, really been better if they had gotten something. And just like in the Bible, we ourselves, I would hazard a guess that every last one of us knows someone in our life who would benefit from meds. And I mean, what has happened is they haven't gotten the meds, and we've learned to kind of navigate around them, right? When we see that look in their eye, we kind of say, well, he on that today, right? And leave them alone. Don't say too much to him. If he's a neighborhood person, if you see him on the stairs and he carrying on that conversation, he don't have no earpiece in, but he's fully engaged in the conversation where he's getting answers and responding to everything, we know to cross the street, right? We might even call his mother, your son out here again. We might say some things. We've learned how to navigate around the mental illness and the patterns without actually addressing them, right? Without actually getting these people to help, getting these people to address their physical needs, with meds to kind of regulate hormones and regulate their emotions. We just normalize it. All the people in that family, they're queer. That was a word I used. They're queer, not in any sexist way or any sexual way. Just odd. They're odd. And I would look at these families and I think, odd is not the word. I don't think we're looking for the word odd. I think we're looking for the word ill. Mentally ill. And so sometimes, we have just made a habit out of navigating around these mental illnesses until somebody goes off the deep end and somebody gets hurt, and then of course we go, it's such a shame, I knew this was probably going to happen, or I hoped that this wouldn't happen, but we'd all seen it coming, right? So being able to get into therapy, find out, a diagnosis if there's one available, that, if there's an actual diagnosis, or if you're just responding to trauma, which is in itself is a diagnosis. Using cognitive behavioral therapy to kind of retrain your brain and reframe your thinking, or do trauma-focused healing, where there's things that's happened to you and it stunted you, right? It's something that happened and right away, you couldn't move past it. You've been stuck ever since. And those things happen to us, right? Several years ago, my husband was in a very bad accident. And I was there. I witnessed the accident. And it was such a terrible accident that it was traumatizing for he and for I, of course. But the first few days that he was in the hospital, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him bloody and torn on the highway. And I could not sleep. And there was a Muslim sister who came in from, I think she was in Chicago at the time of the accident, but whatever it was, I looked up and she was there. And she came in and she said, I can help you. And what she used was a type of therapy that helps. It's called the MDR, and it helps with getting people past trauma. And I needed that. I needed that support so that, first of all, I can get some sleep. Because if you can't sleep, you can't function. You just can't function. You're not going to be on all cylinders. And so many of us are suffering from insomnia for whatever reason. Be it trauma, be it, we are undiagnosed with mania, be it anxiety that we have not addressed that is keeping us up, or ruminating our thoughts that are going around and around in circles and we can't stop thinking. All of these things can deprive us of sleep, and a sleep deprived person can be a careless person when operating heavy machinery, can be an irritable person when dealing with other people, right? And can be a dangerous person as well if they're sleep deprived. So these are the things that happen in our community that we don't really talk about, simply because we've learned to live with it. We really learned to live with it, and it is time now for us to start addressing the social ills that we are suffering from. So in individual therapy, identifying triggers, retraining the brain, CBT, reflection, trauma-focused healing, and then medicine for medical problems. And now, again, if this is only if you're not willing to put in a considerable amount of time learning the necessary herbs and eating habits that can heal your body. And even if you are on medication, I definitely encourage you to find out what you need to eat in order to maintain balance in your body. This is all we get. We get this one right here. And we need to take care of it. And unfortunately, in our community, we have gone for things that kind of satisfy our taste buds, but do nothing for the body. It isn't even really food, right? Something that we can sometimes gain comfort from, but it's short-term comfort because, it makes us ill. And then, of course, that looks like a generational curse too, right? Diabetes in the family, high blood pressure in the family. All these things that look like they're generational are actually, a lot of them are caused by habits. Habits of holding stress in the body, habits of eating when we're upset, habits of cooking badly, or cooking, and it's not healthy foods for our body. So we learn how to address those problems individually. Now, if we're going to do family healing, it's very similar to individual healing, except it involves, of course, the whole family in the process. And there are systems in place, there are theories that we use in therapy that help with that. One of them is called family-centered treatment. I kind of like family-centered treatment somewhat. I think that it does need to be modified for African American families, and I did that freely when I used it. But one thing that I love about that particular model is that it has a family tree that we all create together, right? The family's there and they create this family tree. And we began to write down on a big board, color-coded, different things. Like drug abuse would be in red. Or sexual abuse will be in purple. And as we began to lay out this family history, we began to see patterns of behavior, right? And even when it comes, to personality traits, we begin to see different patterns of behavior, even in the personality traits. All the men were mean. All the women were nurturing. All the men were hard workers. I saw a family tree once where literally all the men from that line died early deaths because they worked themselves to death. And so what brought the family in was that the father was always upset with the son because he considered him to be lazy. And this is the son, he's at the last generation here. And he, unconsciously, he decided, I am not going to work as hard as you people around here work. And the father, when he looked at that family tree and realized that his father and his uncles and everybody had died early death from working themselves to death, he realized what needed to be changed. He was well on his way as well. to leaving here early. And he expected the same of his son. Now, the son was a normal guy. He worked. He just didn't work himself to death, but he worked. He made a good living. He didn't understand why his father had no respect for what he did and, how he took care of the family. And that was the reason. His father was like, you have 6 more hours in a day. You could be working. You come home and you relax after you go to work. He's like, I worked all day. So these are other ways in which family habits can become very detrimental to the family, right? So I love that family tree and that family-centered treatment for that particular component, which can be done, of course, without using the entire model. Family healing happens when we begin to identify the trends in the family and begin to understand exactly what it is that happened and where the disconnect happened, where the healing needs to start. I also think that family trees are very good, and family therapy is very good for acknowledging what has happened. Sometimes just saying, don't gaslight me. And by gaslight, I mean, tell me something didn't happen when we all know it did, right? Or tell me that you did something, that I did something when in actuality you did that to me. So gaslighting is so very damaging because it causes people to have a lack of trust in their own instincts, their own gut, their own spirit, whatever you want to call that thing that speaks to you in the middle of the night when everybody's quiet, all right? So family healing is, I think, very helpful in moving us collectively. Once we begin to heal as individuals, once we begin to heal in family systems, then of course our communities are going to heal as well. But it's our responsibility to take care of those under our responsibility, right? So if we take care of ourselves first and then take care of our children and make sure that the buck stops here with the generational curses, then our household becomes a positive force in the community. And then the community begins to infect each other with positivity, right? That's the way that we're going to be able to heal. So I'm hoping that there's something that you heard in here that will have you moving more consciously toward making changes in the behaviors in yourself, in your family, and seeking the help that you need in order to address it and identifying it, and in doing what you need to do your part in taking the African American community to the next level. We can do this thing if we all do it together, right? Because after all, we are in this life together. Blessed be.
Hi, my name is Sierra Bradshaw, and I'm currently a student at Cato Middle College High School. I'm currently a senior there. And I would just like to talk about police brutality, specifically highlighting racism and just how it is prevalent today in America and really all around the world. Is still occurring, and it's something that we really need to shed light on. Personally, I've experienced many times where I felt myself being fearful in a situation that hasn't necessarily even taken a violent route, but just being aware of different things that have occurred in America with African American people, with myself being an African American woman. A lot of the times it doesn't necessarily matter that you're female. So a lot of people highlight, African American males definitely have it rough, but women as well are discriminated against. And it's a very fearful situation. I'm only 17, but color doesn't beat age. To a lot of people, it doesn't matter. So I feel like that really ties into just why a lot of people that are minorities may not feel safe, especially in America at this time, just because there's a lot that's going on, and a lot of these actions are being covered. We've seen a lot of situations where people in the police force have taken someone's life in an unjust way and they haven't been punished rightfully. So that's definitely something that's kept in mind for people of my race and people that go through similar things that we've seen happening just in terms of racism and police brutality. It's scary. And I don't even consider myself a scary type of person, but that is something that I have to be mindful of as a colored person. And I think it's definitely important to just consider the wide variety of situations that can take place. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a situation where an African American person is rebelling against a police officer. I know that's a lot of rebuttal that the Black Lives Matter movement gets, just because people try to counteract the movement with the idea that somehow the victims of the situation were aggressive, or the victims of the situation were somehow misbehaving to cause that death to occur. But I think as a society as a whole, we really have to realize that death is not an excusable punishment for misconduct. It's not allowable. It's not necessary. It's unnecessary force. And taking someone's life is definitely not the only solution that could be presented in a wide range of situations. A lot of the times these people are unarmed. So as an African American person, once again, that has a lot to do with why we're fearful in America, why we're fearful driving our cars, why our heart rate increases when we get pulled over by the police, or why we're always on edge and looking for cars that look like police cars while we're driving. It's a lot to do with it. So to answer the question overall, no, I do not feel safe in America as an African American teenage girl.
Well, it's Lady back again, and we're coming back to consciousness. I'm in my lane, and I'm gonna make it pop again. Swerving all the drama, open minds like a prophet is. Third eye open, let the classes begin. I'm a real goddess, I hold court. A real goddess, I life source. Making history the right torch. I reach respect my life course. I'm insane, I'm getting money. Been rain, they take it from me. Been claim the throne. Me and my family made this home. Tell me, what's your truth? Who you with and who is you? Do you even have a clue? I'm a rider, you the coupe. We gon' swerve through the city. Swag on uplifted. 2 trucks, we tipped it. We stay lit, we